What is up, college hoops fans, fellow members of Mountaineer Nation? This is Coos.
And this is Mountaineer Paul.
And we have a very special guest to you today on a very special episode of Hoops from the Hill. Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined today by the one and only Jason Scheer from Wildcat Authority, which is an affiliate of 24/7 Sports. He covers the Arizona Wildcats, as you can tell by his lovely background there. Most of you probably know Jason from the conference realignment stuff that's been going on Twitter. He's been a guest on 365 Sports quite a bit. But today, the focus of this show, since this is a basketball channel, we want to talk about Kerr Kriisa. Because as all of you know, he came over from Arizona to West Virginia. We're going to talk about him, get Jason's input on what he thinks we're getting in Kerr Kriisa, what kind of player he is. So with that being said, Jason, I'm just going to throw it to you, man. What do you think West Virginia's getting? What kind of player are we getting in Kerr Kriisa?
You know, Kerr's an interesting player. I think it's good for him that he got a clean start. You know, at the very worst, he is one of the better passers in the country. I mean, he ran Arizona's offense really, really well, led the conference in assists, knows and makes the right decisions. The negative about Kerr is that he's not a great shooter, but he takes quite a few shots. He struggled in some big games, but he's a guy that isn't going to shy away from the moment, and he will absolutely run West Virginia's offense and do it successfully.
Awesome. That's good to hear. Paul, you got any questions?
Yeah. So obviously, I've looked a lot into his game. I think streaky is a good way to put it. I think Bob, a very similar player that West Virginia just had this past season would be Eric Stevenson. As far as attitude, streakiness, this is a kid that a lot of other fan bases don't usually like. But if he's on your team, you like you. And I think that sums up Kerr a little bit from the things I've read and heard. I obviously don't know him or haven't experienced him in Morgantown myself, but that's the idea I get. And so that kind of reminds me of Stevenson. And curious if you think that's a good comparison. And do you think Bob Huggins will be able to rein him in like he was able to do in Eric Stevenson? Because if things go the way we think they are, we may be adding yet another double-digit scorer and adding to what is a top 5 portal class at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's to me and most Arizona fans, that's the biggest question. Kerr is very streaky, but his attitude, I think you said it perfectly. When he's on your team, you love him. When he's not on your team, you hate him. And he talks a lot of crap during a game, after a game. And the issue I think towards the end with Arizona is he would go and talk a lot of crap, and there'd be games where he didn't necessarily back that up. And the thing that's really interesting about this is, I mean, Tommy Lloyd, Arizona's head coach, will get on your case, but he's not Bob Huggins. And so the first reaction that everyone had was, how is Kerr and Bob Huggins going to get along? And I think you nailed it. It's very similar to the Eric Stevenson situation. I still remember when Eric Stevenson did the thing with Marcus Smart on the sideline, and Huggins had quotes afterwards. It's similar where, Kerr's going to have to, I don't want to say Kerr's going to have to change a little bit, but really he is. It's a different style of coaching. Tommy Lloyd he's laid back. Huggins it's a different style. And so I'm really curious to see how Kerr adapts to that. I'm not saying he can't, but it is very different from the coaching style that he's used to.
How is he on the defensive end of the floor?
He's not awful. He's engaged. He's not going to lock his man up or change a game defensively, but he engages. It's not like he just sits there and gets beat all the time. He's probably an average defender. Arizona did not press at all. Their defense was pretty straightforward, half court, man to man. So I am curious to see how he handles a press and if he can lead it there. He's not a super athlete. He's not super quick, but there weren't really any games where he was getting killed defensively. He was kind of just average. He wasn't one of the worst defenders Arizona had, but he wasn't one of the best either.
And he knows that that's somewhere he's got to improve. He said it in a tweet not long after he committed. So I think he knows it's somewhere he's got to improve. But really, the great thing about defense is it's probably 75% effort. Obviously, you've got to have the ability to move your feet, and you have to have some basketball IQ. But if you're willing to do it, that's most of it. And I think Bob Huggins, what he does better than any coach, he's right up there with anybody that's ever done it on the defensive end usually. That includes rebounding, according to him, is getting that out of the players. I mean, you see Bob Huggins teams hit the floor. You see Bob Huggins teams get bloodied up, and it happens every year. And so that's usually what Bob can do for a kid. And I think we all hope that happens for Kerr. For us to have a special season, I think it needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a lack of effort. I think Kerr always tries. And there was a few comments after Arizona's loss to Princeton where he said that, Princeton played harder than we did. It's crazy. That was a quote that he said. And when he said that, that was one of those quotes you say, and it's kind of hard to come back from when you're admitting that you lost to a 15 seed that played harder than you. But that was very rare. Most of the times, he would play very hard and he would go and really dive for balls and all that. And, like you mentioned, I am very curious to see how Huggins handles that situation, because I agree. I mean, Huggins gets a lot out of his players. You don't watch, and it's not a bad thing. You don't watch West Virginia and they're loaded with 5 stars that, he's coaching and all that. He gets the best out of his guys. And I think Kerr needs it, to be honest. It was one of those moves that were probably best for both parties, and Kerr probably needed to change. And when he committed to West Virginia, he even said he needed a different look. Like he was, a lot of people thought he would go to Xavier with Sean Miller, and they have assistants over there that recruited him, but he chose to go to a place where he doesn't really have a pre-existing relationship. And I think that will help him, because sometimes Kerr got a little too comfortable knowing that no matter what, at Arizona, because of the roster and all that, he was playing 35 minutes a game, and there's really nothing Tommy Lloyd could do about it. West Virginia is probably a different situation. The pre-existing relationships aren't there, so he doesn't have a choice. He has to play hard. He has to give all his effort, because if not, there's going to be consequences for him.
Yeah, and to me, that shows a sign of maturity in him. Whether regardless of what people say about the talking and all that other stuff, I mean, if he recognizes that in himself, to me, that shows that he is a mature young man, or at least maturing young man, and knows that that's probably what he needs to get himself to the next level. If he himself to that level, and he thinks Bob Huggins can get him there. And I think, like I said, I think that shows where he is from a maturity standpoint. What would you say to that, Jason?
And I do think Kerr started to mature towards the end a little bit. There were a few times where he went out and said stuff, and then the next game didn't really play well. And I think Arizona fans kind of, I don't want to say they turned on him, but again, it goes back to what I said, where it was kind of time for him to, a separation of sorts. And I think that kind of gave him a perspective that's, there's consequences to the ways I play sometimes, or what I say. And that's a maturity and a kick in the butt that he kind of needed, where maybe he could step outside of everything and say, okay, if I do this, the reaction is going to be that. And I can't have, a situation play out like that. And, it is a maturity thing where if he wants to play at the next level, he knows he has to get better defensively. Offensively, he was pretty much just a 3-point shooter. So he knows that he has to, and to his credit, this past season, he shot more twos. Not a lot by any means, but he shot more twos than he had the year before. And so there's maturity in his game. And I do think that, when he has kind of stepped back during this whole thing and really said to himself, look, if I'm going to succeed at West Virginia, if I'm going to succeed and keep playing basketball, these are the things that I have to kind of settle. And these are the things that I have to stop doing.
one thing Paul and I did a episode on this channel yesterday about NIL and international players. There was an article in Syracuse.com, I think it was, because we have Jesse Edwards visiting today from Syracuse, and he's also a foreign player. But there's a rumor out there that Kerr Kriisa was getting $500,000 to go to West Virginia, which I don't know that I believe that now that I know what I know. But have you heard any rumors that you can, or anything that that you can share about? Did his decision have anything to do with NIL at all, or no?
Yeah, there's ways to get international players money now through work visas and stuff like that. So we're going to see international players get more money. There's a certain kind of visa. Oscar Tshiebwe at Kentucky, I think, was the first one to get it. That's how they paid him. International guys are going to get NIL. I don't know all the details, but I know it's a thing. The rumor was 500. That's not true. But he did get NIL money from what I understand. But I do know that NIL was a factor for Kerr. And, Xavier made an offer. There were certain numbers discussed with Arizona. I don't think it was the only factor, but it was a factor for Kerr. And so West Virginia put together a nice offer for supposedly.
And if you look at it, it's the F1 visa that's what we were talking about. That's the lesser version of the definition. For the other one is you have to be a player of international renown to earn the other kind of visa. Usually NBA players get them. So what you were talking about that Oscar got, apparently it's a little harder for these college athletes to get. So from what I understand, though, I don't know if the 50 is because you can only earn a certain amount in the U.S. and then the rest has to be gotten abroad. But what I do know is that we're glad we got Kerr. I'm glad we got him. I think we needed him. So we had a guy returning there from the guy from Iowa that played really well last year that had similar numbers to Kerr, but he's a way different player. So we needed somebody that could run this offense, and I think if Bob can rein him in, I think we've got a chance.
Agreed. Yeah, we needed a true point guard, and I think we have one now in Kerr. And
I would agree with that. He's absolutely for all the criticism that he gets about certain aspects of his game. He's absolutely, it's undeniable. He is a true point guard that can really run an offense well. And if he's not asked to shoot a ton, or he keeps that part of his game in control, he'll be fine because he ran Arizona's offense and did very, very well doing it.
That's good to know, because the last true point guard we really had at West Virginia that was brought in as a true point guard was Jawan Staten. I mean, because we've had Javon Carter, Deuce McBride, but those guys were not really true point guards. They were turned into point guards once they got to West Virginia because they had to. He had to find somebody to be a point guard. So this will really be the first time, in my opinion, that we've had a true point guard on the roster in quite some time. Yeah, I think it's a huge position to need. The other position to need is center, which they have visiting this weekend. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you at least one question about conference realignment. What do you think, in your mind, is going to happen? I mean, do you see the Pac-12 being able to survive this thing at the end of the day, or what's your gut tell you?
I do. I think there's absolutely a path to the Pac-12 surviving. The longer it goes, I think the worse it becomes. But there's schools that really just want to stay in the Pac-12, and there are schools like the Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, Stanford. I think they're fine staying in the Pac-12. And a couple things to keep an eye on is Oregon and Washington. What does the new Big Ten commish say about realignment? And they're going to reach out and they're going to have those discussions probably in the next month or so. And if it's a no-go, I think that the chances the Pac-12 stays together increase. If there's a possibility, if they're said, okay, let's keep going down the road with discussions, it becomes harder. And Colorado and Arizona are the other things to watch. If they don't want to wait these next 2 months and they decide to go to the Big 12, how does the Pac-12 handle that? Do they bring in a San Diego State and, 2 other schools to replace them and just say, let's continue? Do other schools look to leave? Those are probably the 2 things to really keep an eye on, and probably what the whole base of the future of the conference depends on.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Jason Scheer is not wishing for the Pac-12's demise and is not doesn't even think it's going to happen. So there's no conspiracy theory. He's not paid by Big 12 Karen or whatever the other people are out there that's that he's supposed to work.
I wish we had a little side money here or there that somebody's paying me, but it's not happening.
I hear you, man. Well, Jason, listen, man, I know you've got a busy afternoon. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to come on the show with us today, giving us some foresight or insight, I should say, into what Kerr Kriisa brings to the table and what we can kind of expect out of him when he puts on the Mountaineer uniform.
I appreciate you guys for having me. I am very, very curious about Kerr. I'm going to be watching a lot of West Virginia games this season. Kerr gets a bad rap by a lot of people. I talk to Kerr away from basketball a little bit. He's a good kid. I think sometimes he says stuff like any kid that he shouldn't say, but I think at heart, Kerr's a pretty good kid. So, I wish him the best over there, and I'm really curious to see how he does in that system.
And by the way, he has his own podcast. I don't know if people realize that or not. I found it the other day with a couple of his. I know. Are both of the guys teammates of his or just one?
Just one. He does it with there's a host, and then Pella Larson is his teammate. Okay. I don't think it's going to continue. I think they're just going to have another Arizona player replace Kerr. But there's been 3 episodes like that. But in the last one, Kerr discusses his decision and why he went to West Virginia. So it's a good listen.
I think Paul may be the one that actually sent me the link to that.
Yeah, it's called the Nameless podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
So, guys, go check that podcast out. Jason, real quick, where can they find you on what are your socials?
At Jason Scheer on Twitter, and then wildcatauthority.com is the Arizona site.
And I have his Twitter handle scrolling at the bottom of the screen for those of you who are watching. It's pretty simple. At Jason Scheer, at JASONSCHEER for those who are listening. But Jason, we thank you again for coming on and hope we can do it again sometime.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me.
You have a good one.
Really appreciate it, man.
Thank you.